Charles Elliott. I'm one of the elders at the Beltline Church, and I'd like to just share a brief message with you. Let's talk for a moment about hope. I love the word. I love the sound of the word. I certainly love what it means. Paul, as he wrote that beautiful passage in 1 Corinthians 13, paired hope along with faith and love. Those three together, three powerful concepts that have great meaning for us as Christians. But I want to look at hope in a different way for just a moment. Go with me back to the book of Ruth. You're familiar with it, back in the Old Testament, right after the book of Judges. And during the time of Judges, there was a woman by the name of Naomi, and she and her husband lived in a town of Judah. It's a town called Bethlehem. Difficult times were there, and they decided to move to Moab. And so they, along with their two sons, went to Moab to make a life. But tragedy strikes in Moab, and not only does Naomi lose her husband, but her two sons die as well, and she's left a widow with two daughter-in-laws. Well, there are difficult times also in Moab, and so she decides to return home, to return to Judah, return to Bethlehem, her home place. And so she encourages her two daughter-in-laws, both Moabites, to stay behind and make a life for themselves and get new husbands. One stays, but one decides to go with her. And the one that decides to stay with Naomi is Ruth. And Ruth has tremendous devotion to Naomi. And so as the story progresses, Ruth finds herself gleaning tares from the field, the wheat from the field, of a man by the name of Boaz. And as it becomes clear to Naomi, Boaz is what is called a kinsman redeemer. And as the story progresses further, there comes a point in time when Boaz chooses to marry Ruth. And as the scriptures wind down, and as the story winds down, there's this incredible passage right toward the end of the 4th chapter of the book of Ruth, where all having been lost, Naomi having lost a husband, lost sons, having to go back home, when things were terribly desperate, she finds herself in a remarkable situation where she's gone from utter despair and hopelessness to something else. And this is what is written in verse 13. So Boaz took Ruth. In other words, Boaz marries Ruth. And she became his wife, and the Lord enabled her to conceive, and she gave birth to a son. So Ruth has given birth to a son. Then the women said to Naomi, "Blessed is the Lord who has not left you without a redeemer today, and may his name become famous in Israel. May he also be to you a restorer of life and a sustainer of your old age. For your daughter-in-law who loves you and is better to you than 7 sons has given birth to him." And in verse 16, listen carefully. Then Naomi took the child and laid him in her lap and became his nurse. The neighbor women gave him a name, saying, "A son has been born to Naomi," and that being actually a grandson. "A son has been born to Naomi," so they named him Obed. He is the father of Jesse, the father of David. Think about that. Think about that. In Naomi's lap, her grandson, Obed, is the grandfather of the king. Now, she doesn't know that. But from despair, utter despair, there's been hope. I want to share with you one other story, and I'll leave this lesson with you. There's a writer by the name of Vanitha Reisner, and she's written several different religious pieces, and she tells a story. This is a story of her life, and several years ago, very difficult times had happened in her life, and She said that her life had disintegrated. Her husband had left the family, and her children, who were adolescent girls, were going through struggles with their faith and weren't really convinced that God was real. And they were disillusioned, they were frustrated. And as all this was going on, her health was beginning to spiral down. And she rapidly approached what became one of the lowest points of her life. She was in terrible emotional pain. And she didn't see an end. Her felt like her situation would never change. And her friends tried to help her. They brought food and they prayed with her and they encouraged her the very, very best they could. But despite all these efforts, she just was overwhelmed and very discouraged. And as I said, she was in deep personal pain. And so one morning she decided to reach out to her friends once again to let them really know what she was going through and the pain that she was feeling. And as she started to talk with them, she got to where she couldn't talk. She couldn't say anything else. And she started sobbing. And her friend sat there with her as she sobbed and cried. These are different friends, by the way, from those that we read about in the book of Job that were anything but helpful. These were friends that were allowed to suffer that suffered alongside with her. And then I'm going to read this from a little essay that she wrote. She said, after a long silence, one friend spoke. And she said, I will never forget her words. And this is what her friend told her. He said, when I think of you and pray for you, I keep seeing this image. It's of the disciples and Jesus' mother Mary weeping at the foot of the cross. They're huddled together trying to comfort each other, trying to make sense of all that has happened, but it just doesn't make sense. The sky is black, all hope is lost, their dreams have died. It seems that nothing good will ever come from this. To them, this day, the day that we know is Good Friday, this day, Good Friday, is the darkest day they've ever known. And then this is what her friend told her. She said, but the one thing they do not know is Easter is coming. Easter is coming. And having heard those words, Vanitha said things began to change for her. She said a peace came over her. You know, remembering what's written in John 19. John 19, verse 24. So the soldiers did these things by standing by the cross of Jesus were his mother and his mother's sisters, Mary, the wife of Clopas, and Mary Magdalene. You know, those followers who had placed their faith and hope in Jesus were now watching him die. They knew what it was like to be desperate. They knew what it was like for their dreams to shatter. They knew what it was like for their lives to be ruined, all their plans destroyed, and nothing left to hold on to. They could only see that little picture of their existence, that part of their lives, but that's all they had. But you know, and I know, the story was not over yet. God was not finished. All hope was not lost. All hope was not lost. God can bring beauty from the ashes, can he? Suffering can be temporary, can it not? One day it will be over. The things that we go through ultimately will be for our good, and God will be glorified. You know, these things that we're going through, we're going through challenging times right now. You know it. I certainly do. But this is a snapshot of our lives. This is a snapshot of the life of the church. This is just, for us, this is one little frame in our lives. And we don't know what's coming next. Perhaps the dark times are about to be over. Perhaps they're going to be lingering with us a good bit longer. We do not know. But there's one thing that we do know. Easter is coming. Hope. Don't you love the word? May God bless each of you.